The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord. This passage that Jesus proclaims sounds great. And the people in the synagogue at first thought so as well. If you continue reading, it says after our passage today that they were amazed at what he said and they spoke highly of him. But then if you keep following the same text, reading through the Gospel of Luke, shortly after the reading we hear today, Jesus then says a few more things to sort of unpack this passage. And the people all of a sudden get so enraged that they drive Jesus up to a high hill with the intent of hurling him off a cliff. It's a bit of a dramatic shift. And to be honest, when I read the passage, I don't fully understand the level of the people's outrage. That exactly trying to understand what Jesus said that got them so upset. Probably because I don't understand the nuances of the world they live in. But it seems that perhaps that what Jesus says that sort of upsets the people has something to do with that what he just preached, this passage about liberty to captives and to the poor and so on, that he then says that it applies to certain other people, namely the Gentiles. It seems that he talks about this passage applying to people that the people in the synagogue don't think it should apply to, or in a way that they don't think it should apply. That what Jesus says sounds great, so long as it applies to me in my life in the way that I want. It sounds great as long as it applies to me in my life in the way I want. We live in a world where we have the tendency to make idols out of comfort, convenience, and self-centeredness. Thinking of our own selves, our hyper-individualism, sort of our own selves before all else. And I know myself, I slide into these tendencies. That I like my comforts and convenient things. That when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, I like to apply it to my life as being more like, take up your Snuggie and follow after me. You know? As long as it's comfortable and convenient and it serves me, sure. That all of us, but especially me, we have these inclinations towards comfort, convenience, and self-centeredness. And that we live in this society, in this culture where there seems to be this reoccurring message that we should be able to do whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, with whomever we want. As if this is where freedom lies. But comfort, convenience, and self-centeredness are not gospel values. And none of these things are highly valued by Christ. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and let the oppressed go free, to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord. It sounds great. But what if, like the people in the synagogue, I try to think of, what if this applies to people in a way that perhaps our society doesn't think it should? Or to people, or in a way that people don't think it should. What would be the way this might apply in the world today that might upset some people? What if this liberty to the captives, this good news to the poor, this letting the oppressed go free applies to people, say, like the unborn, like immigrants, applies to our understanding of marriage in the world today? But if we say that this text applies to the unborn, what if that life really does begin at the moment of conception And maybe then how this applies that every human life is precious from the moment of conception. So sharing in the message of Christ is that the good news and freedom for oppression applies to them, for their protection. And if you say that in the world today, then some people might want to throw you off a hill. Yesterday, by the way, is the national prayer for the unborn. And this isn't to blame, like every person who has perhaps participated in abortion, but to blame everyone is evil, but that sometimes we're caught in these systems of the world that, as I said, idolize comfort, convenience, and self-centeredness, and that people in fear or insecure situations might find themselves drawn into these systems. But that this liberty that Jesus proclaims, this good news that Jesus proclaims, is a mission that both fights for the life of the unborn child, as well as for the message of love and healing for the post-abortive mother. But secondly, how might this apply to immigrants, or how we treat them, legal or not? That perhaps some are here, perhaps illegally, because they're trying to leave some other terrible, difficult situation, but aren't necessarily here because of bad reasons. That's not to oversimplify or downplay the complexity of the problems of immigration. But I know some people who are immigrants here who talk about how in parts in Mexico, people have to pay a percentage each month to the drug cartels, a percentage of their income. And I personally know someone who had a relative who in Mexico who owned a business and decided he didn't want to keep paying to the drug cartel, to stand up and do what is right. Unfortunately, after he did that, he disappeared. And no one knows where he is or has heard from him since. So some may risk coming here even illegally to think that life might be that might be better to come here even illegally than to participate in that. It may seem to them to be the morally better option. That yes, a complex situation, but to try to empathize and to remember, as Paul says, that we are many parts in one body, and when one part suffers, all parts suffer. And so how does this message of Jesus and his mission apply here as good news to the poor? And thirdly, as we say how this message of Jesus might apply to how we live marriage. That our faith teaches that God has a plan in what our bodies are made for. That marriage is meant to be between one man and one woman. And it's this complementarity, physical, psychological, emotional, and the union between these two, a committed union between a man and a woman, that is what God made us for and what is literally life-giving. Because it's in this life-giving union that children are able to thrive in a stable love. But that others who feel other attractions, rather than being condemned, or rather called and invited to be what Jesus calls eunuchs for the kingdom in Matthew 19, to witness to the world that their deepest identity is not an attraction or an orientation, but our deepest identity is as a beloved of God. To start there. To witness to the world through the embrace of celibacy, through embracing celibacy, that the love of God is the greatest orientation of our life, the love that orders all the rest of my desires and attractions, invited to a special intimacy with God, that this is the real liberty and the good news that Jesus calls and invites every one of us to. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord. These words that Jesus proclaims sound great. But are we willing to go as far and as deep as Jesus wants to take us? Jesus' vision is bigger and deeper. A call to a deep, beautiful love, if we are willing to go there. To live Jesus' vision, and given to us in and through the church, that doesn't simply fall neatly along party lines. And to recognize that what Jesus reveals to us through the church, as we said in our psalm today, your words, O Lord, are spirit and life. Your law is good, and it gives sight. That when we encounter a teaching of, say, the church, that perhaps grates against me or rubs me the wrong way, to ask ourselves two questions. How is this teaching calling me, inviting me to a deeper love? And secondly, when the church says no to something, what is the deeper yes behind it? That Jesus is always calling us to a deeper love and to say yes to something bigger and deeper. This is what he invites us to and calls us to. Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord.